Hey everybody, I hope you are all doing well and that your writing journeys are going far more smoothly than mine. So today was another early session. It's up at 4:30ish or so. Um, with that, basically within about an hour or so, I was at the keyboard, um, cranking it out, and what you're seeing on the screen here is a bit of the end of my session. So pretty long today, um, and I got a fair amount done. It ended up being about 7 pages of dialogue. Not all this is going to be used. In fact, I plan on paring a lot of it down, and hoping to get maybe a page or so of actual usable dialogue out of it. One of the things about this process, especially if you're working on like a short story or a novel, whatever, is that you, at least for myself, I don't like to have dialogue being the thing that carries my entire story. What I'm working on is not a stage play, it's not a screenplay, it's not something where I need dialogue to carry my work. Dialogue is merely a tool. And while a very good tool, very useful tool, it's an excellent tool, it is just a tool. And I find that for myself, the best dialogue that I write is often very sparse. I'm not like Raymond Carver here or something, right? Or Robert McCormick or something where, or I guess Elmer Leonard as well, where I'm going to use, dialogue to carry a very snappy sort of minimalist style of writing, right? I'm not going to use a bunch of dialogue to carry my story, not go very in depth on the details and the character and all that, and internal monologuing and this and that. For me, it's not dialogue laid over kind of a rough sketch of a story, which is how I often find many dialogue centered stories to be. For me, it's a very rich story with a little bit of dialogue peppered in. That's basically my style, and it works well. For me, it's often worked well in the sense that my stories read very well, and the dialogue that's in there often stands out. Just coincidentally, the dialogue is just not as strong as it could be. And that's an idea I want to express to you, is the idea that you can go a bit minimalist with your dialogue. In fact, you might be wise to do that. A very minimalist sort of style when it comes to dialogue allows the things that are said to stand out, and it allows a good degree of, I'll say, depth within your writing, right? The page that you're not taking up with dialogue, the word count can be used to improve your descriptions and your internal monologues and etc. Right? And for me, that's how it's always been. And in truth, for a lot of people that are newer writers, not just the ones that like I coach or whatever, but like just in general, from what I see, a lot of dialogue that I read could best be trimmed down a ton. Like if you're within like your first few years of writing, I'm betting a lot of that can be pared down. A lot of it can be simplified. It's often very clunky, very conversationalist, like extremely conversationalist, to the point where all of the malaise of a real conversation is peppered in because you want the dialogue to sound realistic, right? Like, hey, how are you? I'm doing well. How are you? Excellent. How was your weekend, right? Like, it's a lot of unnecessary things that are put in there, in addition to everything else. And so for me, it's always less. It's always less. If you can do less with dialogue, I feel like it always works better. Or in general, it tends to work better. I don't think I've ever read a piece by somebody where I've said, I want more conversation. I've read pieces and thought that I want more interaction between characters, but that can simply be just improving the conversations that I already have. I've interaction doesn't necessarily mean express dialogue or more of it. It means better discussions, wiser discussions in a sense, right? More critical discussions, right? And yes, there are moments where I don't think characters spend enough time together, which lends itself to more dialogue just by osmosis. But it's not as though I read these stories and I think, oh, I need more of it. It's I need more interaction between them. A bit of a distinction there. It's not just adding more dialogue for the sake of it. It's not just adding more conversation for the sake of it. It's I want relationships to be explored. And yes, the more time you spend with a character between two characters, the more dialogue is going to be just, again, by the nature of it. But it's not me clamoring for you to make a more dialogue-heavy style of story. Perhaps that's a better way of saying it. Yeah. And so, again, these are just my thoughts on just what I see with that process and ways to improve it, especially if you're newer. Obviously, if you've been doing this for a while, go right ahead. Or if you're trying to write in a style that is much more punchy, right? That is much more, again, the minimalist or the heavy, conversational style, whatever. Or if there's a certain dialect and way of speaking and that you're really a master at, right? Again, like a Cormac McCarthy, right? Who can seem to master that southern style, western style of talking that better maybe than anyone else I've ever read, right? Something like that, it works well to go with that, because that's what you're trying to emulate. But in general, if it's not what you're going for, I generally will say be minimalist. Let your dialogue stand out when it comes out, but don't drown us in conversation.